Hello there. Today I'm taking a look at a classic wine, but from a slightly different location. The one I'm looking at is Chateau Musar, which is made by the Hochar family. It's a Lebanese wine, so this is made from grapes grown in the Bekaa Valley. And Chateau Musar has a reasonably long history. It was started by Gaston Hochar, whose name is on the label, and he started the winery when he was aged 20 in 1930, and was quite ambitious to produce a high quality wine. And as part of his ambition, during the Second World War, he made friends with a British Army officer who was serving in that part of the world, somebody called Ronald Barton, whose family happened to own Leeville-Barton and Langoa Barton in Saint-Julien, two Grand Cru Classé there. And this friendship, helped to build the Hochar family's ambition to produce a sort of I suppose a Bordeaux style wine. And to this end, Gaston's son Serge ended up studying at Bordeaux University with the famous professor Émile Peynaud, and he returned to the Lebanon in 1959 and took over as winemaker there. His father very kindly stepped aside and let him take over, and I think that was a very wise decision, because Serge became a very highly respected winemaker. I mean, as much for the hard work that he had to put in terms of managing the winery through Lebanon's long civil war from the mid-70s through to the late 80s. They had times when it was very difficult to pick. I mean, in 1982, it was only because there was a ceasefire that they were able to go into what was a very war-torn area and pick grapes and make a wine at all. So certainly it's been a challenging wine to make over the years. This particular wine, 2015, evidently the vintage was quite a challenge, and on top of the fact that actually in 2014 Serge had passed, and so his sons had taken over the winemaking there, and in fact his sons sort of worked together to make the wine and manage distribution in much the same way as Serge and his brother Roland had worked together to run the winery. 2015 was challenging in terms of the weather, because evidently the beginning of the season was very wet, and later on in the vintage there was a drought. So in fact they lost a large amount of fruit. The Cabernet Sauvignon crop was something like 65% down. As a result, it's a blend of more or less equal proportions of Cabernet Sauvignon, Cinsaut and Carignan, and that points to something else there as well. Although the ambition has been to make a wine in a Bordeaux style, the grape varieties chosen, I mean Cabernet is obviously a Bordeaux grape variety, but Cinsaut and Carignan, southern French varieties, perhaps reflecting more the Mediterranean nature of the Lebanon and its climate. So how is the wine produced? The three varieties are vinified separately. They're picked by hand. They have to be the grapevines are gobelets, they're bush vines, so you can't pick that mechanically. They come from two villages in the Bekaa Valley, Ana and Kefaya, and as I say, the varieties vinified separately. They're allowed to ferment with their own ambient yeasts. They are fermented in concrete tanks, which are actually, with red wines it's really good, because the fact that the concrete keeps the heat enables the fermentations to stay relatively vigorous, etc. And you get quite good extraction as well. After fermentation, the wine goes into oak for a year, French oak. There's nothing in the notes saying whether that's new or old French oak. I suspect it's probably older, because actually the nature of this wine is very much in terms of long aging. Yes, it spends a year in oak, but actually the three varieties weren't blended together until January 2018. So they'd spent the time after they'd been in oak in concrete tanks again, gently aging and softening, and I guess there will be a slight oxidative element in that aging at every stage as well. Having spent nearly sort of 3 years before it's bottled, the wine is then kept in their cellars for 4 years. I thought that getting a 2015, I had a reasonably mature wine here, but looking at things, it looks as if the 2016 is actually the current release. So this is a relatively recent wine, in terms of release anyway. So let's have a look at it, shall we? First thing to say is the colour. There's a lovely, vibrant ruby colour here. I mean, there appears to be some darkness to the pigmentation, but the depth is not enormous. I can see through it very easily, and there's a lovely vibrancy to the ruby colour. I mean, there's good sunlight here at the moment, but yes, I can see through it very easily. And let's have a look at the aromas. Gosh, smelling it, there are a number of elements there. There's clearly some red fruit. There's a prune note there. Sorry, there is a prune note, but it develops from a more red plum note. And then there are rich, quite high-toned sultana, raisin, dried fig notes, which it's suggesting this sort of, relatively long aging before release. These are wines that are developed. And yes, at the back, there's also a sort of a more developed mushroomy note. Perhaps some forest floor hints. There's not an obvious sort of cedar suggesting that this has had lots of time in new oak. So let's have a taste. There's a surprising freshness there, giving quite a sort of a juiciness to the red fruit nature. So fresh red plum, almost raspberry note, but then there are those mushroom hints. There's actually some quite firm tannins, but strangely they're firm and rounded. They've got good grip. They're quite drying. There's an earthiness, but they're not actually astringent and cedary. The freshness, I'm not particularly sort of salivating. It's not incredibly mouthwatering, but you get to the finish, and there's a sort of a rich core of licorice that actually I think was on the nose as well. That sort of slightly licoricey note, and through from that you're getting a quite a delicate, high-toned red plummy fruit. And I think that's the acidity following it through. The wine has 14% alcohol according to the label. It shows reasonable tears on the glass. It's got pretty rich tannins there. I'd say that's medium to medium full-bodied. But the alcohol on the finish is not particularly hot. There's this core of bitter licorice, but actually the fruit is coming through. There's enough fruit that the freshness of that red fruit can overcome the sort of the alcohol there. The flavours are lasting really quite nicely, and there is that sort of quite high-toned note to the whole thing. So yes, a quality wine, an interesting wine with good structure. I would certainly say that on the evidence of the glass, this wine would probably age very happily for 7 or 8 years, probably 10. In terms of the reputation that Chateau Musar has, I suspect this would probably age much longer. I mean, this is is well known for aging really well. The only thing I would say is sometimes it's a wine that I wouldn't actually pair with other wines, because there's something in the nature of its freshness that is not quite the same as a wine from Bordeaux. There's quite a high level of volatility in Musar, and if you serve it alongside younger, fresher wines, sometimes that doesn't show up really well. I mean, but actually in other ways, that sort of, I suppose, there's a savoury edge to it that does, make it sit very well alongside foods such as sort of red meat, game, that sort of thing. And yeah, so that's a real positive as far as that's concerned. So I hope you find that interesting. Chateau Musar, a wine well worth searching out. and looking at. I think it can be great value. Certainly always tends to deliver on quality. So thank you for joining us. Do watch again. Bye now.